Hello, everybody. This is John Arnold, and I'm back again with my colleague Chris Fine. Hi, Chris.
Hey, John. It's good to be with you again.
Thanks. Same here. And we're back with another podcast episode with John Arnold here and Chris Fine. So we are continuing our series of trends in technology, particularly around communications and really digital transformation and its impact on collaboration, its impact on customer care, its impact on the workplace, future of work, etc. So much to cover. And on today's edition, we're going to talk about highlights from the recent Twilio Signal 2018 conference that I attended in San Francisco. And Twilio is one of those companies that is kind of hitting its stride now. They have been toiling away for several years. They started in one direction, pivoted a bit, and they are hitting the marketplace right now kind of at the right time. It's been reflected in their momentum of revenues, certainly customer acquisition, but also profile, and no doubt their share price has reflected a lot of that too. So this is a company to watch, and I think they've gotten past the stage of just being a disruptor, and I think they truly are bringing innovation to the market that is starting to find a home, and it looks like they are finding ways to leverage these new technologies, particularly around APIs, into things that businesses really need and are willing to pay money for and are getting value from. So there's some really interesting things to talk about, and I know, Chris, you have known about Twilio. If you recall, at one of our Monage events that we attended with Jeff, I believe he had Jeff Lawson from Twilio via video one time talking about things. I mean, that's certainly in the wheelhouse of the kind of things Jeff was trying to address at his Monage events.
And Twilio is certainly an intriguing company because the idea of turning the communications networks into an API is certainly something that many people have thought about for a very long time. John, when you went to this conference, I was not able to be there in person. I viewed some of it remotely. But when you went to the conference, what did you think were some of your major takeaways? And you mentioned the traction they're getting. But in terms of directions and in terms of where they're focusing, what do you think are some of the major areas?
Yeah, so a big one is I think it's getting people to understand what they call the API economy, and the idea that APIs are becoming a true value driver, but also a differentiator for what they believe is the important thing. And what I mean by that is their CEO, Jeff Lawson, who is always a good guy to watch. He's high energy, he's passionate, he communicates well, and he kind of knows how to get the ideas across to the audience, who are mostly developers, by the way, and I'll get to that in a second. But he distinguishes between collaboration and engagement as types of communications kind of approaches. And his differentiation in his mind is that collaboration is really driven by applications. And that would be like using unified communications platforms, and the apps would be voice, video, chat, IM, conferencing, etc. And his point is that companies don't differentiate by the type of PBX they use, because they all use more or less the same technologies. He feels that there's more value to be had around engagement, and particularly with how companies engage with their customers. And that, he feels, is better addressed by APIs. So his feeling is that applications are great for collaboration. They're fairly standardized out of the box, but he feels that APIs, which are easily customizable, have more relevance for engagement with customers, because every customer wants a personalized experience. It's a bit of a broad vision, but I can kind of understand where he's going, certainly as a modus operandi, to say, hey, APIs are the driver of value in today's workplace.
John, when you say engagement, have you got an example that he might have cited or that you saw at the conference that goes beyond what most of us might think of as a customer experience?
Well, I think he talks about a really good one he used was, he cited an example of 1-800-Flowers as one of their customer success stories. And it's the idea that we're engaging with customers in ways that we didn't do before that kind of create that emotional attachment to the product or service. And why he cited that one, he made a very good observation. When you order flowers, he says it's the one thing that you buy, but you never see it, right? You don't generally buy flowers for yourself. You buy them for somebody else. So once you've kind of ordered the flowers, and you don't know what happens after that. You're generally not there when the recipient gets the flowers. So there's a million steps along the way from placing the order and paying for it, from the big moment when the door opens and those flowers are delivered on Mother's Day, birthday, etc. And hopefully it goes well and look how happy they are at the end. You don't see any of that. So it's interesting he's pointing out that, when you make that initial purchase, you don't know what happens after that. So that doesn't happen with everything, other purchases or transactions that you make. So he's making the point that by using their APIs at various steps along the way, the customer can kind of be a more involved participant in the process. They can, if it's a surprise, that's one thing, but if they know it's coming, you can track the process of the shipment, which is fairly straightforward to do. But the customer, when they receive the product at the end, there's a moment there when they can engage not just with the delivery person, but then they engage with you. And by using APIs throughout the process, they can instill these kind of moments along the way where the customer can actually go back and track the progress of the shipment and see these different points of contact. And these things weren't really possible before, and they weren't considered important before, but when you understand the end-to-end experience of the journey of that transaction, it's just a way to make the experience more meaningful for the customer. That's a little abstract, I know, but I think this idea that when you make a purchase and you don't hand it off, once it's handed off, you don't see it, you don't know. But with APIs, you can find a way to know, to make sure were the flowers properly prepared? Were they shipped? Were they delivered properly? It gives you as the buyer that sense of satisfaction as well, that, hey, this whole thing was handled end to end pretty well.
That makes sense. And one can also envision that this type of approach, or this scalable technology, especially when coupled to a cloud platform like AWS or Google as a back end, could really make a company that's not a giant and hasn't invested billions of dollars in the technology of customer service play like a big company, which is pretty interesting too, to scale up and give the kind of personal customer service that you do when you're starting and your key people are answering the phone in person, to scale up that quality of experience. And you see a lot of companies out there, all of these lifestyle companies, for example, the fancy mattress companies and the equivalent across all the consumer sectors, where they really place a lot of emphasis on this. And if you had to go build that yourself, that would be a very, very expensive project. And you don't necessarily have to do that if you have the APIs. You just have to think of a flow that helps to scale up what you get as a startup talking to people in person.
Yeah, exactly. And that speaks to one of the big kind of pitch points they had here, is that, the cloud allows you to scale, almost instantly, as you say, to compete with any size of competitor out there. So this model is really, they're really validating the power of the cloud and the power to extend these kind of customizable applications across your whole network and all the touch points if you're talking about customer care. So they know that kind of they're hitting the market at a time where, their offerings are fairly mature. They have a critical mass of customers and developers selling their stuff. So this felt a little bit like a coming out party for them. And so they made a lot of major announcements to validate that. They recently, first of all, they had Flex, which was their big contact center platform. They announced Autopilot, which is a form of AI for conversational interfaces. It's a little bit like Google Duplex, which I think we talked about before. And also they have this thing, they acquired this company called SendGrid, which is basically, well, it's an email platform. Now, you would think about email as being part of the ecosystem, but it's not going away anytime soon. So they realize that they need to have that in their mix if they're going to be pushing the whole collaboration thing. So anyways, a lot of strong announcements that support the momentum that they're seeing in the marketplace. So it was really good to see that. And they also demonstrated some really interesting virtual reality stuff. They did a chat with avatars in real time between him and the executive of another company called Magic Leap. So they were showing kind of some forward-thinking technology. I'm not sure where that stuff's going to go, but they're in a good place in terms of really pushing things in the marketplace as being, the leading player in this arena, and showing the applications that are out there, that are real now, and the kind of customer base that they're building. So it's a good news story on a lot of levels, but I do have a fundamental question on this whole thing, and that is, the audience is almost all developers, and that is their route to market. And the traditional model, of course, is going through integrators and resellers and agents, et cetera, et cetera, the conventional environment that collaboration vendors use. Now, this is really no different than what Google does, what Amazon does. All of these offerings are developer driven. I don't really know how much business and influence developers really carry in the marketplace, but there were a couple of thousand of them there, and it's a huge universe. But developers are also pretty mercurial bunch, right? They go where the money is. So I think as long as Twilio is bringing stuff to market that they can get excited about and drive new revenues with their customers, it's a good plan. But if Twilio starts to stagnate or has problems, then developers will not stay loyal to them. I don't think. I think that's the nature of being a developer. So it's a very different crowd than what we're used to seeing in the more conventional, enterprise marketplace.
Well, that's a very good point. Although you could point to historical parallels of, the growth of industries like CTI and VoIP, where it started with the developers, and since the platforms did end up working, it grew from there because they were able to go back to their businesses and say, we can do this more flexibly now. But I do have a question for you about, and realizing on time here, what do you think is, if any, level of concern that Twilio may have with some of the problems that are affecting SMS and the PSTN, like junk calls and fraud and other types of spam that are causing, debatably, some people to get turned off as customers of interactions or engagements, if you want to call it that? What do you think that's a factor?
Well, I think it can be. I mean, these things are certainly open to abuse, and I think that's the flip side of when things are so easily customized. I think again that falls into the hands of their developers being the channel. Now, Twilio apparently, I think, does have some direct customer relationships. I didn't get enough of a set of insights on where they differentiate that, but for developers, they're only going to do things that are good for their customers. So I think if that becomes a problem, I think the developers will hopefully know what to do in terms of building safeguards into these applications, because it's their customers aren't the ones who are doing the heavy lifting, right? It's the developers who build these things. The whole idea is that Twilio is a bit of a blank slate, right? And they say, we want to see what those developers are going to do with this. And presuming they're, business-minded, professional, ethical, they're only going to build applications that are good for their customers. If they want to have these little side projects to encourage other things, that's another story. And I don't know how you stop that until it becomes kind of out there in the marketplace. But I think this also speaks to broader issues about, when you start bringing AI into the picture, how accurately does it interpret cues that it's picking up from, the conversations? Are they understanding customers' intent the right way? Because if it's not, then you can have those problems inadvertently, and that's a different kind of a problem set. But I don't know if they're far enough along in the market with these things yet to have specific applications that are meant to monitor these kind of activities. But I think if that becomes enough of a problem, I'm sure they'll fix it. If there's one thing that stood out about this conference, Chris, is that these guys have a very strong sense of social consciousness and social justice. A lot of their messaging was about helping the disadvantaged. And they made some very strong kind of messages about how they themselves have some targets for diversity in their own ranks in terms of gender and race and ethnic makeup. So they're very conscious of doing the right things, and I think it's very typical of a San Francisco, Silicon Valley kind of California vibe. And it rang true with this audience in a big way. So I think they know they've got a good thing, and I'm sure they're going to do everything they can to keep that vibe going.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you, Jon. I think we're probably at our time limit here, but it's certainly a topic we could go on about, and I think you've said a lot of things that are sort of watch this space. And as this company and its industry continues to grow, I'm sure we'll check back in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Chris. Yes, a company to watch and a space to watch too. They're certainly not the only player. Okay, with that, so let's give thanks, Chris and I, to everyone for listening, and appreciate your support, and we will be back with another podcast episode soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jon. We'll talk again soon.